Hello there, and welcome wherever you are listening from tonight. Whether you're settling into bed, wrapping yourself in a warm blanket, or letting the late night quiet soften the noise of the day, I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're going to drift back, far back, to a world of olive trees, marble temples, and quiet, starlit courtyards, to a city that believed it was the school of all Greece. Athens, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, theatre, and so much of what we now call the Western mind. But this isn't a story about power or glory or the rise and fall of ancient empires. It's a quieter story, a softer story, a story about a single human being who lived by asking honest questions and died for refusing to stop. His name was Socrates, a barefoot old man with a crooked nose, a worn cloak, and eyes that seemed to look past the world, deep into the hidden places of the soul. If you've had a long day, you don't need to brace yourself. You don't need to analyze anything tonight. Just let yourself drift. Let the rhythm of the story settle your body. Let the ancient world unfold slowly around you, like warm light spreading through a darkened room. Because this journey won't be rushed. It moves gently, as thought often does. Soft, circling, unhurried. Take a breath. Allow your shoulders to drop. Let your jaw unclench. And if you'd like, you can close your eyes for a moment and imagine the quiet before dawn. In a prison cell beneath the courthouse of Athens, its small, stone walls hold the cold of the night. A single oil lamp flickers in the corner, casting slow-moving shadows that sway like tired dancers. 15 men squeeze into the room, friends, students, admirers, their faces lined with sleepless sadness. They've been here for hours, trying to hold on to every word spoken by the old man on the wooden cot. Before them, Socrates, 70 years old, legs shackled in iron, calm, always calm, speaking about the immortality of the soul with the same casual tone someone else might use to talk about the weather. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, a rooster crows, a small, familiar sound that signals the coming of dawn. And with dawn will come death. The cup of hemlock is ready. The verdict has already been spoken. Democracy, the great pride of Athens, has voted to silence its most questioning voice. But this is not a moment of despair. Oddly enough, it feels peaceful. Socrates does not tremble. He does not beg. He does not curse the city that condemned him. He simply continues the same work he has always done, examining life, examining truth, examining the soul. His friend Crito, unable to hold back tears, begs him to escape. Horses are waiting. A boat is prepared. Guards have been bribed. Freedom is only a few quiet steps away. But Socrates refuses, not out of pride, not out of stubbornness, but because escape would betray everything his life has stood for. He has spent decades walking the streets of Athens, asking its citizens, priests, generals, poets, merchants, what justice truly is, what virtue means, what it takes to live a good life. How could he now break the very laws he taught others to examine? How could he run from the city that gave him a voice, a city whose laws protected his right to question everything? So he stays, he sits, he speaks, he listens. The room is full of grief, but his voice remains steady. It washes over his friends like a warm tide, softening fear, making space for acceptance. And as you listen, you might feel a little of that calm yourself, the calm of a man whose inner world is unwavering, a man who lived asking, what is the good life? and who now meets death with the same quiet curiosity he brought to every conversation. In a few minutes, we'll step out of this cell and travel back through time to Socrates' childhood, to the bustling agora where he questioned strangers, to the golden age of Athens, and the long road that led to this final morning. But for now, just breathe. Let the lamp flicker softly in your imagination. Let the whispers of ancient voices drift into silence, and let the story settle gently around you like dust on warm stone. Tonight, we walk beside Socrates, not to mourn him, but to understand how a quiet, persistent seeker of truth became the most unsettling, most influential, and most peaceful mind Athens ever produced. Whenever you're ready, we'll begin. Chapter 1. The last morning in the Athenian prison. The lamp burns low. A thin wick floats in a small dish of oil, trembling gently with every draught that creeps through the cracks of the stone walls. Its flame paints soft, wavering shadows across the prison cell, shadows that stretch, melt, and gather again like silent companions. The air is cool and heavy with the scent of damp stone. Outside, the city of Athens still sleeps under a grey-blue sky, waiting for the first light to touch the Acropolis. Inside this narrow room, time feels as though it has slowed to a patient heartbeat. Socrates sits on a wooden cot, his back straight despite the iron shackles circling his ankles. The chains are cold, but he doesn't seem to notice. His face, lined with 70 years of life, carries an expression not of fear or bitterness, but of curious, calm, almost as if he were observing his own last morning with the same thoughtful attention he once devoted to examining the nature of virtue or justice. Around him gather his friends, Crito, Phaedo, Apollodorus, Hermogenes, Ctesippus, men who have followed him across marketplaces, gymnasiums, war campaigns, and long wandering conversations under the shade of plane trees. They've come long before sunrise, unable to sleep, unwilling to leave him alone in these final hours. 15 men in a cell built for 3, their shoulders pressed together, their breaths unsteady, their eyes red and tired. And yet, in the midst of their sorrow, Socrates speaks as though guiding them through an evening walk rather than toward the brink of death. "Try not to let grief confuse you," he says softly, his voice warm and steady. "Let us examine this moment together as we have examined so many others, with clarity, with calm, with reason." His words float through the room like drifting smoke. To the men around him, this is unbearable. Apollodorus, the most emotional among them, has been crying since the night before, unable to imagine a world where Socrates' voice will no longer echo across the agora. Crito grips his friend's hand tightly, as if refusing to accept that the fingers he holds will soon fall still. But Socrates remains a center of quiet gravity. He has lived this way gently, consistently, fearlessly, and this morning he will die the same way. The door creaks open. A jailer steps inside. He is not the enemy. He is not cold or cruel. In truth, the man looks deeply shaken. His eyes are swollen and red, his mouth unsteady. For a month, he has watched this unusual prisoner, watched him teach, laugh, question, and comfort the very men who came to comfort him. He has grown to admire him, even to love him a little. He holds a small clay cup in both hands. Inside is the hemlock, enough to still a body slowly from the feet upward, numbing, freezing, creeping inward until the heart cannot beat. "I must tell you the instructions," the jailer says quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "When you drink it, walk around, until your legs grow heavy. Then lie down. The poison will do the rest." He hesitates. He looks at Socrates the way a student might look at a teacher he has known for years. "You are the noblest man I have ever met," he whispers, then turns away abruptly so the others won't see his tears. Socrates takes the cup without a flicker of fear. His fingers curl around the rough pottery as though holding a cup of water taken from a well on a warm summer day. He lifts it, inspecting the dark liquid inside. The smell is sharp, earthy, bitter. "If it is permitted," he asks the jailer gently, "may I pour a small portion for the gods, a last offering before I depart?" "There is only enough for the dose," the jailer replies, wiping his eyes. "Then I will pray instead," Socrates says softly, "for a gentle departure and for the blessing of whatever awaits." He touches the rim of the cup to his lips. Some friends turn away, some cover their faces. Apollodorus lets out a strangled cry and sinks to the floor. Socrates pauses mid-sip and scolds him not harshly, but with the same affectionate firmness he used when chiding a student for sloppy reasoning. "Hush now, control yourselves. This is not the time for disorder," he says. "We must meet this moment with dignity." He finishes the cup, every drop. He hands the empty vessel back, and without hurry, he stands. The chains rattle quietly around his ankles as he begins to walk slow, steady steps across the cold stone floor. He moves like a man demonstrating a lesson, every motion deliberate, every breath calm. His friends follow him with tear-filled eyes, watching his body begin to respond. "It begins in the feet," Socrates notes, almost academically, "a numbness, a coldness. It creeps upward." He presses his heel against the floor and nods thoughtfully. "Yes, just as the jailer described." There is no tremor in his voice, only the curiosity of a philosopher witnessing a natural process. As the numbness climbs his legs, he pauses and looks at Crito. "My dear friend, if we owe Asclepius a rooster, do not forget to pay the debt." Crito nods, crying, swearing he will. Socrates continues, pacing until his knees weaken. Phaedo and Hermogenes step forward to support him, lowering him gently onto the wooden cot. They arrange his cloak over him. His breathing remains steady. The cold spreads to his abdomen, his chest. His last sensation is a faint chill just below the heart. His final gesture is quiet. No drama, no fear, no final sermon, just a small movement of his hand, as if adjusting his blanket for comfort. Then stillness. A long silence settles over the cell. The friends sit motionless, listening to the soft fading sound of the lamp, the distant murmurs of Athens beginning its day, and their own quiet breaths. Tears come slowly, not loud, not violent, but soft, the way rain begins on a calm evening. And above the city, the first gold line of dawn touches the marble of the Acropolis. Socrates, who lived for questions, has given the world his last answer. But to understand how Athens came to this moment, how a city famed for wisdom chose to silence its wisest man, we must leave this small cell and walk backward in time, back through war, glory, triumph, fear, and hope, back to the Athens that shaped him and the Athens he challenged with every breath. Chapter 2, Athens, the shimmering birthplace of democracy and doubt. Before the hemlock, before the trial, before the crowded prison cell with its trembling lamp flame, there was a city, a living, breathing city made of marble and dust, philosophy and politics, sunlight and shadow, the place that shaped Socrates and the place that would one day destroy him. Athens, tonight, let yourself drift back to that world slowly. like stepping into warm water. You don't need to memorize names or dates, just follow the rhythm and let the city rise around you in soft layers. Imagine waking up in Athens as the first light spills over the Aegean Sea. The roofs of narrow houses glow honey gold. Market stalls begin to open, filling the air with the smell of olives, figs, and fresh bread. From somewhere far off, a shepherd leads his goats through the city gate. The streets are alive with footsteps, laughter, and the gentle clatter of pottery. Above everything towers the Acropolis, its marble temples catching the early sun the way snow catches morning light. Even from a distance, the Parthenon seems to hum with quiet perfection. This is the Athens Socrates was born into. But to understand his journey, we have to feel the heartbeat of this city, the one that believed it had discovered the secret of how humans should live together. A city of debates, a city of voices, a city where ordinary people could shape destiny simply by raising their hands and voting. Athens called it democratia, the power of the people, not kings, not priests, not generals, but fishermen, potters, farmers, metal workers, every male citizen over the age of 18. It was a radical miracle for its time, a political experiment so bold that other civilizations stared in disbelief. If you listen carefully, you might hear the assembly gathering on the Panyx Hill. Thousands of citizens sit in the open air. The sun beats down on their shoulders. They murmur, argue, laugh, interrupt, cheer. A man rises to propose a new law. Another challenges him. The debate swells like a wave, rolls forward, then crashes. At the end, hands go up, decisions are made, lives are changed. It's chaotic, imperfect, loud, but alive. This was the world Socrates loved to walk through, a world where every person was invited to speak, but almost no one was invited to think deeply. Everyone had opinions, few had understanding, and so he asked questions. Athens, for all its brilliance, was also a city of contradictions. One moment, it celebrated freedom. The next, it feared anything that threatened its sense of certainty. Even as it birthed democracy, it also birthed doubt. The Athenians worshipped knowledge, but were uneasy around those who looked too closely at the foundations of that knowledge. They loved debate, but disliked being shown the limits of their own reasoning. They honored thinkers, poets, playwrights, philosophers, yet they punished anyone who asked questions that cut too deeply into tradition. This tension lived everywhere in the city, in the bustling agora where merchants sold olives and wine, in the grand theater where tragedies explored fate and justice, in the gymnasiums where young men exercised their bodies and minds, in the temples where priests interpreted omens from birds and bones, and in the courts of law where juries of hundreds decided guilt or innocence with a show of hands. Athens was brilliant but anxious, confident yet fragile. It believed it had discovered the perfect way of life. But perfection is always nervous, always afraid of the question that might reveal a hidden crack. And Socrates was exactly that question, walking barefoot through the city every morning. Still, for many years, Athens thrived. Its thinkers shaped the mind of the Western world. Its artists sculpted marble into myth. Its playwrights explored the deepest fears and hopes of humanity. It was a place where ideas lived with an intensity rarely seen again in history. But even the brightest light casts the darkest shadow. Athens' golden confidence contained the seeds of its downfall. The city that believed it was chosen by the gods began to mistake success for destiny. It stretched its influence across the sea. It built walls and ships, gathered tribute from islands, and created an empire in all but name. With triumph came arrogance. With arrogance came war. The long and brutal Peloponnesian War against Sparta drained Athens of blood, wealth, and spirit. Its walls were breached, its democracy briefly overthrown, its faith in itself shaken. When the city finally rose again, it did so wounded, traumatized, and searching for someone to blame. And in moments of fear, societies often turn against their thinkers, their artists, their questioners. In the new, frightened Athens, Socrates' gentle questioning suddenly looked less like philosophy and more like danger. For how can a city rebuild fragile confidence when a barefoot old man keeps reminding people that true wisdom begins with admitting one's ignorance? Athens was torn, half of it inspired by Socrates, half threatened by him, and this tension would only grow. But before Athens turned against him, before the trial, before the hemlock, Socrates was simply a child of this city, a boy wandering streets filled with marble and myth. To understand the man he became, let us drift back even further into the quiet beginnings of his life. Chapter 3: The Stonemason's Son, a childhood shaped by stone and silence. Before Socrates was the unsettling voice of Athens, before he challenged generals and poets, before he taught Plato, before the world carved statues of him, he was simply a boy born into dust, not glory, into labor, not luxury, into the rhythmic tapping of a chisel against marble. Let yourself imagine young Socrates, not yet a philosopher, not yet a gadfly, just a child wandering through the workshop where his father worked. His father, Sophroniskis, was a stonemason, a craftsman, a man whose hands were rough, strong, and permanently covered with a thin powder of white dust. His days were spent shaping marble blocks destined for temples, gravestones, monuments, and homes. Sometimes, when the light streamed through the roof, the dust in the workshop would sparkle like floating stars. And in that soft glow, you can picture little Socrates watching the way his father moved, patient, steady, precise. Chisel, tap, pause, tap again, not too hard, or the entire block might crack, not too soft, or nothing would change. Every motion a question, every strike an answer. This rhythm would one day become the rhythm of his philosophy, removing what is false to reveal what is true. Socrates grew up surrounded by stone that needed to be understood before it could be shaped, and perhaps without realizing it, he learned early that transformation requires patience, that everything has a hidden form waiting to be uncovered. His mother, Phanerate, was a midwife. Her hands brought new life into the world. Her work was quiet, intimate, filled with whispered instructions and gentle reassurance. She didn't shape stone, she shaped moments, those fragile first breaths when a child enters the world. Years later, Socrates would say he inherited her craft. He did not give birth to ideas, but he helped others bring theirs into the world. He became a midwife of the mind, but as a young boy, he was simply the child of two ordinary people, one who worked with stone, the other with life. He had no noble blood, no wealth, no pedigree. He walked barefoot through dusty streets, carrying tools for his father or fetching water for his mother. Sometimes he played with other boys near the agora, racing between columns and laughing in the shade of olive trees. He was not yet the strange, compelling figure Athens would come to love and fear, yet something unusual lived inside him from the beginning. He would later speak of a voice, a small internal sign, a whisper of intuition that warned him away from certain actions. Not a command, not guidance on what to do, only a gentle nudge telling him what not to do. Ancient Athenians believed in omens from birds, sacrifices, and dreams, but Socrates' sign was inward, silent, personal, a conscience more than a prophecy. He didn't know what it meant at the time, only that it felt like truth. As he grew, he began to spend more time in the bustling areas of Athens, watching, listening, noticing things most people ignored, the way merchants exaggerated the quality of their goods, the contradictions in the stories told by poets, the way politicians used beautiful words to hide ugly intentions. Even as a teenager, Socrates' eyes saw beneath surfaces. He learned to carve stone with skill, working beside his father. Some said he even crafted the figures of the three graces, though this may be myth, a story people told later to connect his early work with his later brilliance. But whether or not he carved those statues, one thing is certain: he understood the discipline of shaping truth from raw material. He also understood the limits of appearances. Athens at the time worshipped beauty, strong bodies, elegant clothing, sculpted features. But Socrates was not beautiful. His nose was flattened, his eyes bulged slightly, his walk was unremarkable, his cloak was simple, worn year after year. And yet, through this plain exterior grew a mind sharper than any chisel. Socrates was not drawn to wealth or status. When other boys fantasized about winning Olympic glory, he was more intrigued by questions that seemed simple but held entire universes inside them. What is courage? What makes a person good? Why do we want the things we want? What is the soul? What does it mean to live well? He didn't ask these things arrogantly. He asked them with the same gentle curiosity a child might bring to a strange seashell found on the shore, turning it over, listening to it, wondering about its hidden patterns. In his youth, Athens was thriving. Philosophers from distant cities arrived to teach astronomy, mathematics, and the nature of the cosmos. Poets performed plays that stirred the minds of audiences. Politicians debated laws that shaped the direction of the entire Greek world. Socrates absorbed everything, not through study, but through presence. He didn't sit at a desk. He wandered. He listened. He questioned not to challenge, but to understand. And slowly, quietly, the shape of his life began to form. He was not destined to remain a stonemason, though he practiced the trade for years. He was not destined to become a poet, though he admired their craft. He was not destined to lead armies, though he would later prove astonishing courage in battle. He was destined to become something Athens had never seen before, a man who walked through the city like a living question, a man who cared more about examining a soul than building a temple, a man whose presence alone made others rethink their assumptions. But that transformation, the shift from stonemason to philosopher, could not yet be seen. It would take war, suffering, and the pressures of a wounded city to reveal it. For now, Socrates was still young, still learning, still silent, still forming, a seed beneath the soil, gathering strength. Later, he would shake the foundations of Athens, but first, he grew quietly under its sunlight, and from that stillness, a remarkable life began. Chapter 4: The Soldier Who Walked Through Snow. Quiet courage in the wars of Athens. Before Socrates became the philosopher who unsettled Athens, he was a soldier, not a commander, not a hero celebrated in epic poetry, but a calm, quiet presence in the most violent places a human being can stand. To understand him, we must walk with him into war, not the dramatic war of legends, but the real, cold, exhausting kind that stains the ground with mud and fear. Let yourself drift back again to a Greece fractured into feuding city-states, where shifting alliances sparked conflict after conflict, where honor demanded that every citizen who could carry a shield had a duty to stand in the phalanx, shoulder to shoulder. Socrates, son of a mason, was no exception. He became a hoplite, heavy infantry, armor gleaming in the sun, shield rim pressed against his neighbors, his spear held in steady hands. The siege of Potidæa snow, silence, and endurance. The first campaign that shaped him began in 432 BC, when Athens marched north to crush a revolt in Potidæa. The siege dragged on for nearly 3 bitter years. Imagine the cold, icy winds screaming across the Thracian plain, snow piling around tents that were barely strong enough to stand, men shivering beside smoky fires that never gave enough warmth. Most soldiers wrapped their feet in wool and sheepskin to survive the frost. But Socrates walked barefoot through ice, through mud, through frozen earth, not as a performance, not as an act of pride, but because he seemed untroubled by discomfort in ways no one could understand. Alcibiades, who later betrayed Athens, was a young man on this same campaign. He would speak of Socrates in almost haunted tones. There he was, barefoot in the snow, in weather where others could barely stand. He endured more than anyone, and no man ever saw him seek shelter or retreat from hardship. His endurance wasn't loud. It wasn't heroic in the dramatic sense. It was quiet, inward, unshakable. During the siege, something strange happened. One dawn, as the cold first light touched the encampment, Socrates stood motionless in one spot, his eyes unfocused, his thoughts drifting somewhere far beyond the battlefield. He remained there all day. Soldiers passed him, joked about him, circled him. They cooked meals, sharpened weapons, argued, slept. Still he stood. Night fell. Stars wheeled overhead, and still he stood, unmoving, lost in contemplation. Finally, when the sun rose again, he greeted it with a small prayer and walked calmly to join the morning formation, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. This was the first glimpse of something Athens had not yet learned to see, a man whose true battles were internal, whose mind traveled farther than any army, whose inner peace could endure more than the body should allow. Delium, a retreat that revealed his soul. Another war, another moment carved into memory. In 424 BC, during the Battle of Delium, Athens suffered a crushing defeat. The phalanx broke, men panicked, shields fell, bodies clogged the narrow paths as soldiers fled for their lives. Retreats are the most dangerous moments in ancient warfare. The line collapses, discipline dissolves, and the enemy cavalry cuts down the running. Most Athenians threw away armor to run faster, but not Socrates. He retreated slowly, deliberately, turning now and then to face the enemy, his calm presence forming a kind of gravitational field around him. Laches, the Athenian general, later testified, "Socrates saved my life. His composure made the enemy think twice before approaching. He walked like a man being escorted, not like a man fleeing." Imagine that. A battlefield swirling in chaos around him, the screams of the wounded, the thundering hooves of cavalry, dust choking the air, and in the middle of it, a man walking as if he were strolling through the agora, discussing the nature of justice. This wasn't bravado, this wasn't pride. It was something deeper, a soul anchored so firmly that external terror could not unmoor it. The philosophical warrior. Greek culture often separated the life of the mind from the life of the soldier, but Socrates showed that bravery in battle and bravery in thought sprang from the same well, a person who examined his fears, who trained his inner world, could stand firm where others collapsed. Battlefields revealed what Socrates already lived, that the body is temporary, but the soul's choices define who we are. In Potidaea, his endurance stunned the young soldiers around him. In Delium, his calm saved lives, and yet these experiences did not inflate his pride. He didn't return to Athens boasting. He returned with deeper questions. What is courage? Is it fearlessness or understanding? Is it an instinct of the body or a discipline of the soul? These questions would follow him into the agora, where he would quietly confront generals who bragged about bravery but could not explain it. He would ask priests what piety meant, and judges what justice was, and statesmen what virtue required, because on the battlefield he had seen that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the presence of clarity. A soldier, but never a killer. One of the most extraordinary things about Socrates' military life is how deeply it influenced his philosophy. To him, war showed the frailty of human judgment, how quickly confidence collapses, how the majority is often wrong, how crowds panic, how fear drives people to abandon their values. It made his later trial even more tragic. He had risked his life for Athens, not once, but repeatedly, and Athens would repay him by accusing him of corrupting its youth, as though he had never stood in its defense. But Socrates did not dwell in resentment. He carried no bitterness. When he spoke of his military service, it was always with the tone of a man explaining a lesson, not reliving trauma. War had given him perspective. It stripped away illusions. It hardened his resilience. It deepened his serenity. It made him realize that the most important battles were not fought with bronze spears, but with honest dialogue. The quiet paradox of Socrates the soldier. To the men who served with him, he seemed nearly superhuman, barefoot in the snow, standing still for a full day and night, walking calmly through chaos. But the truest mystery of Socrates was not how he endured hardship, it was how little he required. He lived on simple meals, slept little, owned almost nothing. Pain, hunger, cold, they seemed unable to penetrate the fortress of his mind. And yet, he was gentle, funny, humble, human. He joked with comrades. He comforted the frightened. He encouraged the timid. He listened without judgment. This combination, immense inner strength, paired with deep compassion, was what made him unforgettable. Even enemies respected him. Even soldiers who barely understood philosophy sensed that something about him was unusually, quietly true. War shaped him, but peace revealed him. After his military campaigns, Socrates returned not as a hardened veteran, but as a man clearer than ever about how fragile and precious the examined life is. He had touched death repeatedly, not just seen it, but walked beside it. And rather than being hardened, he was softened. He returned with a gentler curiosity, a deeper patience, a calmer presence. War had not taught him victory. It taught him humility, perspective, and the necessity of questioning beliefs before they harden into destructive certainty. This was the Socrates who would soon wander the agora each morning, barefoot, seeking conversations, seeking truth. But first, before he became the unsettling questioner of Athens, the city itself would change, and that change would determine everything. Chapter 5: A city of thinkers, priests, poets, and sophists. Athens in the age of Socrates was not simply a city, it was a vast, living mind. If you close your eyes now and let yourself breathe a little more slowly, you can almost feel its hum, a soft vibration made of arguments, prayers, poetry, law, debate, and laughter, an energy woven from curiosity and contradiction. Let us drift into that city as it was in Socrates' youth. Morning settles over the agora, the great marketplace at the heart of Athens. Merchants arrange piles of olives and figs. Fishermen unload shimmering nets of silver blue fish. Women bargain for wool. Children chase each other between the stone columns. But look closer, because here, the market is more than a place of trade. It is a theater of ideas. On one side, a priest of Zeus stands beside a stone altar. He has sacrificed a dove, its white feathers scattered softly on the ground, and now examines its liver, searching for the will of the gods. Citizens gather, waiting for omens of crop, war, peace. 20 feet away, a sophist from Abdera speaks to a crowd of young men. His voice is smooth, confident, practiced. He explains that the gods are merely human inventions, created to keep people obedient. He claims that truth is not absolute but flexible, bendable like a reed in the wind. He promises to teach the art of winning arguments, even when one is wrong. Not far away, a poet recites verses about the origins of the universe. Children repeat the lines with wide-eyed wonder, while old men nod, remembering their youth. And moving through all of this, like a soft current moving under the surface of a river, is Socrates. He walks barefoot, as always, his cloak threadbare but clean, his pace slow and observant. The people around him bustle with purpose, but Socrates walks with no destination in mind. His purpose is simply to see, to listen, to ask. Athens at this moment is changing rapidly, maybe too rapidly. For over 1,000 years, Greek life had been grounded in tradition, in Homeric stories, in ancestral customs, in the unquestioned authority of the gods. But now, in this brief golden window, a new phenomenon is taking shape. The professional teacher, the sophist. Sophists traveled from city to city, dazzling audiences with their rhetoric. They claimed to teach young men virtue, but their virtue was not moral character. It was political success. They taught persuasive speech, the ability to sway a jury, to lead an assembly, to appear wise rather than be wise. They charged high fees, so high that only the wealthy could afford them. Protagoras, the most famous of them all, charged the equivalent of 3 years' wages for a single course, and for that price, he taught that man is the measure of all things. In other words, truth depends on the individual. If something feels true to you, then it is true for you. This idea intoxicated the youth of Athens. It gave them freedom, power, and permission. It suggested that reality itself was negotiable, that with enough skill in argument, one could shape the world however one wished. Another sophist, Gorgias, claimed something even more radical. Nothing exists. If something exists, we cannot know it. If we can know it, we cannot communicate it. Words, he said, were not vehicles of truth. They were tools of manipulation, weapons. Under his spell, young aristocrats learned how to twist a courtroom, how to turn guilt into innocence, how to make the weaker argument defeat the stronger. Athens, always proud of its intelligence, now found itself enthralled by cleverness. It was a dangerous shift, from truth to technique, from wisdom to performance. And Socrates watched all of this with a growing concern that looked nothing like anger, but very much like love, because he cared for the city. Its soul mattered to him. He saw that Athens was becoming skilled, but not necessarily wise, articulate, but not necessarily honest, confident, but not necessarily understanding. He saw young men who could speak beautifully but think shallowly, who could win debates but lose their moral compass, who could command crowds but not command themselves. And so Socrates began the quiet work that would define his life. The difference between sophistry and philosophy. Socrates was often mistaken for a sophist. People saw him talking with young men, surrounded by eager listeners, and assumed he must be a teacher selling wisdom. But he charged no fees. He claimed to possess no knowledge. He offered no lectures, no doctrines, no textbooks. The sophist sells answers. Socrates asks questions. The sophist delights in persuasion. Socrates seeks understanding. The sophist performs. Socrates listens. One seeks admiration, the other seeks truth. If you stood beside Socrates in the agora, you might see him approach someone with an innocent question. What is courage? What is justice? What makes a life good? And the person, confident, practiced, self-assured, would give an answer. Socrates would nod politely and ask for clarification, then an example, then another example. Then he would point out the contradictions, then the exceptions, and slowly, gently, the person would realize they didn't know what they thought they knew. This process had a name, Alenchus, the Socratic cross-examination, but it felt less like an interrogation and more like someone cleaning a window that had been fogged over for years. He wasn't humiliating people, he was liberating them from their own illusions. Still, to many Athenians, this felt threatening, painful, uncomfortable. No one likes discovering that their certainty has cracks. The sophists offered a comforting lie. You can be right if you argue well enough. Socrates offered a challenging truth. You can only be right if you understand. The sophists trained performers. Socrates trained thinkers. And in a democracy, a system built entirely on speech, this difference was seismic. The market of ideas. Every day, the agora became a battlefield of thought. Socrates moved between groups as naturally as a breeze. Here, he questioned a merchant about fairness. There, a soldier about bravery. Elsewhere, a priest about piety. His conversations were not planned. They blossomed spontaneously, like wildflowers in unexpected places. Sometimes he spoke with slaves. Athenians found that shocking, but to Socrates, wisdom had never belonged to rank or wealth. Sometimes he spoke with foreigners, sometimes with young boys who barely understood the world yet, sometimes with elderly men who had lived through 5 wars, but had never questioned their childhood beliefs. His patience was astonishing. He listened, even when the answers were foolish. He waited, even when the speaker grew defensive. He probed gently, like a physician examining a wound, without causing unnecessary pain. And slowly, the youth of Athens began to gather around him, not because he promised success, but because he offered something rarer, a chance to understand themselves, a clash of values. As the sophists grew richer, as their influence spread, as their students filled political offices and law courts, Athens began to change. Ambition grew sharper, rhetoric grew more powerful. The ability to distort the truth became a prized skill, and Socrates, barefoot, poor, humble, became a quiet counterweight to that rising tide. He wasn't simply asking questions. He was protecting the soul of Athens, trying to bring it back to itself, to a sense of virtue, of honesty, of curiosity without arrogance, of wisdom without vanity. This gentle resistance made him beloved by some and feared by others. Those who valued truth saw in him a teacher unlike any other. Those who valued power saw in him a threat. The city, still glowing from its golden age, but already shadowed by war and political turmoil, was becoming a place where the wrong kind of brilliance flourished, a brilliance that hollowed itself from within. And Socrates, in the heart of it all, kept walking softly through the agora, one question at a time, one conversation at a time, trying to guide Athens back toward wisdom. In a world increasingly enchanted by cleverness, he did not know it yet, but this gentle devotion would one day lead the city he loved to place a cup of poison into his hands. Chapter 6: The Socratic Method, Gently Breaking Certainty. Morning sunlight spills across the polished stones of the Athenian agora. The merchants are setting up their stalls, dust rising softly around their sandals. Somewhere, a potter hammers clay, a baker opens her oven, a child calls out to a friend, and in the middle of this living, breathing chaos stands Socrates, not announcing anything, not lecturing, not proclaiming wisdom. He simply watches, his eyes slightly protruding, always alert, move from one conversation to another. He studies gestures, tones of voice, small flashes of pride or fear. To most Athenians, the agora is a marketplace of goods. To Socrates, it is a marketplace of assumptions. Every stall holds a belief. Every conversation reveals a hidden certainty. Every passerby carries an unexamined conviction. And today, like every day, Socrates begins his quiet work, gently breaking certainty, not to destroy people, but to free them. A quiet trap of questions. Socrates approaches a man standing near a booth where bronze armor gleams in the sunlight. The man wears medals on his chest, his arms muscled from years of combat. He is explaining loudly to a group of young men what courage is. Courage, he says, is standing your ground and never running from battle. The youths nod, the medal glints. The man's voice is strong, confident, unquestioned, until Socrates steps forward with a soft smile. My friend, he begins as gently as a warm breeze. You speak beautifully, but tell me, what of the Scythian warriors? When attacked, they retreat swiftly, then turn to fire their arrows. Are they cowards? The general frowns. No, of course not. That is their way of fighting. Socrates nods. So one can retreat and still be courageous. The general hesitates. Sometimes, he finally says. And what of sailors? Socrates continues. When they back water to ram the enemy, are they less brave because their ship moves backward? The brows around the circle begin to knit. The mood shifts. The general's confidence wavers. Well, that is tactics, not cowardice. So, Socrates concludes softly, courage is not standing still, nor is retreating cowardice. Perhaps courage is something else. The general stammers. The young men lean closer. Socrates is not mocking him. His tone is gentle, curious, as if he, too, is trying to understand. But everyone in the circle now feels it. A truth held too tightly has begun to loosen. They stand on shifting ground. This is the Socratic method, not a weapon, not a performance, not humiliation. A lantern held up to the fog of certainty, definition, clarification, contradiction, collapse. Socrates follows a simple, almost childlike pattern. 1. Ask for a definition. What is courage? What is justice? What is goodness? 2. Test it with examples. Is this case included? What about that case? 3. Reveal contradictions. These two things cannot both be true. 4. guide toward confusion, aporia, a place of sincere not knowing. 5. Show that not knowing is not failure, but the beginning of wisdom. Unlike sophists, he never humiliates. He never raises his voice. His questions feel soft, but they peel away layers of illusion with the precision of a sculptor's chisel. If someone becomes angry, he remains calm. If someone becomes embarrassed, he reassures them. If someone storms off, he simply turns to the next person with the same quiet curiosity. Socrates does not want disciples. He wants thinkers. Aporia, the soft collapse. When Socrates questions someone long enough, something almost sacred happens. Aporia, a stillness, a pause in the mind, a crack in certainty, not despair, not humiliation, but an opening, like a curtain parting just enough to glimpse something truer behind it. Imagine that moment. You believed you understood fairness until you realize your definition contradicts itself. You believed you understood bravery until a single example unravels your explanation. You believed you knew honor, piety, virtue, until the questions reveal that some beliefs were simply inherited, never examined. This moment, fragile, vulnerable, clarifying, is the seed of wisdom. Socrates nurtures it gently. He does not crush people with superiority. He doesn't say, "I know better." He says, "Now we know that we do not know." And that is the first step. The sophists left men feeling clever. Socrates left them feeling honest. The beauty of not knowing. Athens worshipped knowledge. It celebrated victory in debate. It rewarded confidence. But Socrates offered something radically different. The beauty of not knowing. He taught that admitting ignorance is not weakness, but strength. That recognizing the limits of your mind opens the path to understanding. That humility is the soil from which truth grows. He believed that the unexamined life is not worth living, not because it is immoral, but because it is shallow, like sailing across the ocean without ever looking below the surface. Socrates invited people to dive deeper, to pause, to question, to peel back the first answer and the second and the third, not to find a final truth, but to become a little more awake. Why his method threatened Athens? On the surface, Socrates' questions seem harmless, simple, innocent, but underneath, they shook the foundations of Athenian society, because in a democracy, it is dangerous when citizens discover that many leaders do not understand the very concepts they claim to represent. Socrates exposed judges who could not define justice. He exposed priests who could not explain holiness. He exposed generals who could not clarify courage. He exposed politicians who had memorized speeches but not ideas. And Athens began to ask, if these men cannot explain virtue, why do we trust them to lead? This was the quiet revolution of Socrates, not violent, not rebellious, but deeply destabilizing. He dismantled false authority, one question at a time, not because he wanted power, but because he wanted truth. Yet truth, in times of fear, is often the most unwelcome visitor, the gentle persistence that changed minds. Socrates' persistence was legendary. He could spend an entire day talking about the meaning of courage, or fairness, or goodness. He could question someone from sunrise to dusk without raising his voice or losing his patience. His calmness disarmed anger. His sincerity softened pride. His humor eased embarrassment. He made philosophy feel like a quiet walk through a grove of olive trees, not a battlefield of egos. Even when he reduced someone to aporia, He did so with kindness, guiding them through the fog toward a clearer, more honest self. People left him unsettled, but lighter, less sure, but more real, stripped of illusion, but closer to themselves, cultivating souls, not followers. Socrates never built a school, never wrote a book, never charged a single coin, never gathered crowds intentionally, and yet a following formed around him, not of students, but of souls drawn to authenticity. His poverty was his message, his barefoot wandering was his statement, his humility was his signature. In a city obsessed with wealth and status, he lived as if neither mattered. He taught without teaching, he led without leading, he inspired without trying. And when asked why he lived this way, he would simply smile and say, "I am searching for the good. Won't you walk with me for a while?" A method that prepared him for death, the same calm curiosity with which he questioned a general or a poet or a merchant was the calm curiosity he brought to his final morning. In that prison cell, he questioned death as he questioned everything else. What is the soul? What is its purpose? Where does it go? Why should we fear what we do not know? The Socratic method was not a technique, it was his way of living, a life of examination, of dialogue, of peeling back layers, of accepting uncertainty, of honoring truth over comfort. And in the end, this method allowed him to drink the hemlock without trembling, because to Socrates, the unknown was not a threat, it was simply the next question. Chapter 7, The Oracle of Delphi and the Wisdom of Not Knowing. Dawn breaks softly over the mountains of central Greece. The first light brushes against the limestone cliffs of Mount Parnassus, revealing narrow paths carved into the ancient rock and tall cypress trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. This is Delphi, once considered the center of the world, the place where heaven's whispers reached the earth. People traveled here from across the known world, kings, generals, farmers, widows, merchants, each carrying questions heavy on their hearts. They climbed the sacred slope, purified themselves in the crystalline spring, burned offerings of honey cakes and incense, and waited for the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, to speak the god's truth. But this morning is special, not because a king has arrived, and not because a general seeks victory. This morning, a man named Chaerephon, energetic, impulsive, loyal to a fault, has come to ask a question, not for himself, but for his strange friend back home in Athens. A friend who goes barefoot, a friend who owns nothing, a friend who wanders the agora, asking questions like a gentle storm, a friend who never seems satisfied with easy answers. Socrates, the question that changed everything. Chaerephon steps into the dim, smoke-filled chamber where the Pythia sits. She sways above a fissure in the earth, inhaling the sweet-smelling vapors that rise from deep underground. Her eyes are half closed, her breath slow, as if listening to something distant. Chaerephon bows, and he asks, "Is any man wiser than Socrates?" It is a strange question, almost laughable in its boldness. Socrates himself would have scolded Chaerephon for asking it. What arrogance to bring such a question to a god. But Chaerephon has always believed in Socrates, more deeply than Socrates believes in himself. The Pythia listens. The room seems to hold its breath. The shadows tremble on the walls. Then she speaks. Her answer is simple, clear, final. No one is wiser. Not Socrates is wise. Not Socrates is among the wise. Simply, no one is wiser. A divine verdict. A proclamation from the God of truth himself. Chaerephon's heart races. He stumbles down the sacred path, clutching the oracle's reply like a treasure. hurrying back to Athens to deliver the news. He bursts into the agora, breathless. Socrates is standing in the shade of a stoab, talking to a group of young men. Chaerephon blurts out the oracle's message. The crowd gasps. The youths stare in awe. Some even bow their heads. But Socrates simply blinks. He looks troubled, deeply troubled. Socrates rejects his own greatness. If Socrates were a sophist, if he wanted followers, or fame, or the illusion of divine endorsement, he would have embraced the oracle's words instantly. But Socrates knew himself, and he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was not wise, not in astronomy, not in politics, not in poetry, not in craftsmanship, not in metaphysics. He could not accept that Apollo, the god of clarity and reason, would make such an obviously incorrect statement. So Socrates faces a paradox. The oracle cannot lie, but I know I am not wise. The only logical conclusion is, the oracle does not mean what we think it means. So Socrates decides to test it. If he can find even one person wiser than himself, one person who truly understands truth, then the oracle will be disproven. This becomes his mission, not to prove himself wise, but to show that the god's statement was mistaken. His search begins with the politicians. The politicians, the illusion of wisdom. Politicians in Athens were admired, respected, often wealthy, and always proud of their influence. Socrates approaches one, a man known across the city for his oratory and leadership. He asks him gentle questions about justice, equality, goodness, governance. The politician speaks eloquently, confidently, with the practiced rhythm of someone used to applause. But as Socrates asks more questions, a quiet unraveling begins. Contradictions appear, ambiguities surface, assumptions crumble. Within minutes, the man who seemed wise cannot explain the very concepts he campaigns on. Those standing nearby begin to laugh. The politician becomes angry, defensive, embarrassed. Socrates bows and leaves, his heart heavy. This man thinks he knows, Socrates says to himself, but he does not know. He believes himself wise, but his wisdom is only appearance. And so Socrates realizes he is wiser than this man. Only in this one small respect, he knows he is not wise. The oracle's meaning begins to stir. The poets, inspiration without understanding. Next, Socrates turns to the poets. Surely these men who write verses so beautiful they move entire cities possess deep wisdom. He chooses the most celebrated poets of Athens. He asks them to explain the meaning of their own lines, to clarify their imagery, to reveal their insights. But something unexpected happens. The poets cannot explain their poems. They created them, but not from understanding. Their verses were gifts of inspiration, not results of knowledge. The poets look confused, ashamed. Some become irritated. Socrates realizes with sadness, they speak many fine things, but they understand little of what they say. And once again he sees the pattern. They believe themselves wise, but they are not. The craftsman, expertise and overconfidence. Finally, Socrates seeks out the craftsmen, the shoemakers, the blacksmiths, the carpenters, the sculptors, and here he finds something new. The craftsmen are wise in their particular skill. The cobbler knows leather, the blacksmith knows metal, the carpenter knows wood. Their knowledge is real, earned, precise. But then he sees the trap. Because they know one thing well, they think they know all things well. Their expertise becomes the foundation for imagined wisdom in areas far beyond their craft. And once again Socrates sees it clearly. They think they know, but they do not know. The oracle's meaning revealed. Now the message of Apollo becomes clear. If no one is wiser than Socrates, it is not because he is wise. It is because he alone knows that he is not. Human wisdom, all human wisdom, is small, fragile, limited. The wisest human is simply the one honest enough to recognize this. Socrates returns to the agora with a new mission, not to teach answers, but to reveal illusions, not to instruct, but to question, not to claim wisdom, but to guide others toward the freeing awareness of their own ignorance. I am wise, he says, only in this, that I know nothing. This statement, whispered across centuries, becomes the foundation of Western philosophy. But in Athens, it becomes a slow-burning fuse, because people who believe they are wise do not enjoy discovering they are not. Socrates has unintentionally become a mirror, one that reflects not beauty, but truth, a truth many prefer not to see. The gentle danger of honesty. As Socrates continues his conversations, more and more people leave him unsettled. He does not insult them, he does not mock them, he does not claim superiority, but he removes the illusion that power equals understanding, that confidence equals wisdom, that eloquence equals truth. And this makes him dangerous to the politicians who need authority, to the poets who need admiration, to the craftsmen who need prestige, to the sophists who need followers. Socrates becomes a threat, not because he is violent, not because he is rebellious, not because he is disrespectful, but because he reveals, quietly, kindly, relentlessly, a mission that could not end well. The oracle's words echo through Socrates' life. No one is wiser. He interprets it as a divine command, a mission given by Apollo to examine himself and everyone around him. He becomes Athens' conscience, its most honest voice, its softest critic, its clearest mirror. But mirrors, even gentle ones, can be painful to look into, and the city that once celebrated him will soon turn against him, not because he is wrong, but because he is right. And truth, especially quiet truth, is rarely welcomed by those who depend on illusions. Soon, Socrates will confront the young men of Athens, those brilliant, dangerous minds, whom history will forever link to his fate. But that is the next chapter. Tonight, let the oracle's message settle softly within you, that there is a rare kind of wisdom in simply admitting that we do not know. And in that humility lies the beginning of everything worth discovering. Chapter 8, Dangerous Minds, Alcibiades, Critias, and young Plato. Athens is quietly shifting beneath the surface. On its marble stages and in its bustling agora, the city still shines, full of debate and laughter, trade and poetry. But behind that brightness, the political ground trembles. War scars its pride. Internal factions sharpen their knives. Ideologies split like cracked pottery. And in the middle of this fragile tension stands Socrates. He walks slowly through the city, alone but never lonely, with young men trailing behind him like curious shadows. They are drawn not by promises of power or wealth. Socrates has none to offer, but by something rarer, a mind unafraid of truth, a soul unafraid of itself. Among these young followers are three names that history will remember: brilliant, beautiful, dangerous. Alcibiades, Critias, Plato, each one touched by Socrates, each one transformed in a different direction, each one helping shape the fate that will soon claim him. Let's drift into their stories, not quickly, but slowly, like a soft descent into deep water. Alcibiades, the beautiful storm. If you were walking through Athens on a warm afternoon, you would know Alcibiades before you saw him. You would hear whispers ripple through the crowd, the way people murmur when marble statues come to life. He is dazzling, tall, athletic, radiant like a flame in human form. Women blush at the sight of him. Men admire him. Children follow him through the streets. His voice is charming, his smile disarming, his mind sharp as a blade. He is the kind of man Athens was built to worship, but he has a flaw that Socrates sees immediately. He is a slave to admiration. Praise feeds him more than food. Attention warms him more than sunlight. Love intoxicates him more than wine. And so Socrates approaches him not with flattery, but with something Alcibiades has never met, a gaze that sees through him. One afternoon, Socrates stops him in the street. "My dear Alcibiades," he says gently, "you spend so much time polishing the outside of yourself, but when will you turn inward and polish your soul?" Alcibiades laughs, embarrassed but curious. No one speaks to him like this. No one dares. And so begins one of the strangest friendships in Greek history, the barefoot philosopher and the golden youth. Alcibiades is drawn to Socrates like a moth to a quiet flame. He follows him through marketplaces, through dusty roads, through military camps. He admires Socrates' courage. He envies Socrates' serenity. He imitates Socrates' humility, but only in moments. For Alcibiades is a storm that cannot be calmed. He rises to political power, then betrays Athens, then Sparta, then Persia, then Athens again. Each betrayal shakes Athens' trust. Each defection leaves blood on his hands. And though Socrates never endorsed Alcibiades' actions, some Athenians will later ask, if Socrates is innocent, why did such a man walk beside him? Alcibiades will become a weapon in the case against Socrates, but for now, he is simply a brilliant, broken young man who loved the philosopher he could never become. Critias, the dark reflection. If Alcibiades is a flame, Critias is a shadow. He is older than Alcibiades, quieter, more thoughtful, but with a steel beneath his calm. At first, Socrates sees promise in him. Critias is intelligent, articulate, capable of deep reason. He asks difficult questions. He considers morality seriously. He wrestles with the nature of virtue. But Socrates also senses something dangerous. Critias loves ideas more than he loves people. Where Socrates sees humanity, Critias sees mechanisms. Where Socrates sees souls, Critias sees tools. He is fascinated by power, not the empty flattery that seduced Alcibiades, but power as control, order, dominion. When Athens collapses after the Peloponnesian War, Critias sees opportunity. He helps establish the 30 tyrants, a brutal oligarchy that seizes control of the wounded city. Under his rule, dozens of Athenians are executed without trial. Property is seized, dissent crushed. Athens becomes a city ruled by fear, and the people remember. Critias once walked beside Socrates. He once sat at his feet. He once questioned him with admiration. And though Socrates opposed the tyranny, though he disobeyed their orders and risked his life doing so, the connection remains. Critias will become another stone in the weight that later sinks Socrates. But for now, he is simply a brilliant student who embraced the darkness of certainty instead of the humility of not knowing. Plato, the seed of a new world. And then there is Plato, quiet, tall, thoughtful, his eyes deep, his voice measured, his mind like a still lake reflecting everything clearly. Plato does not fall in love with Socrates like Alcibiades does, nor does he twist Socrates' teachings like Critias eventually will. Plato listens deeply. He follows Socrates everywhere, through the agora, through gymnasiums, through private homes, through back alleys, through philosophical storms, and quiet conversations with fishermen. He writes nothing at first. He simply observes. He sees how Socrates stands in the cold, barefoot, unmoved. He sees how Socrates treats slaves and beggars with the same respect he gives to wealthy nobles. He sees how Socrates never grows angry, never seeks victory in arguments, never desires fame. He sees how Socrates' questions cut illusions like threads, leaving truth exposed and trembling. Where others grow defensive, Plato grows curious. Where others feel threatened, Plato feels liberated. Where others walk away, Plato stays. He will eventually write dialogues that preserve Socrates' voice. Long after the hemlock stills it, he will become the greatest student any philosopher has ever had. But at this moment, he is simply a young man, standing in the shade of Socrates' presence, learning what it means to seek truth gently, honestly, and endlessly. Why these students matter. These three men, each brilliant, each unforgettable, would shape the destiny of Socrates. Alcibiades would make Athens paranoid about the influence Socrates had on young elites. Critias would make Athens terrified that Socrates' questioning led to political rebellion. Plato would immortalize Socrates, but not until after the tragedy. Together, they become the distorted mirror in which Athens sees Socrates' shadow, not the gentle philosopher, but the imagined threat. And Athens, wounded by war and political chaos, will seek someone to blame, someone who taught dangerous young men to question authority, to think freely, to resist manipulation. And who better to blame than the man whose only weapon was honest conversation, the seeds of a trial. As these young men rise and fall and rise again, Socrates' reputation shifts. To some, he is a saint of reason, the soul of Athens. To others, he is a corrupter of youth, an enemy of tradition, a man whose questions loosened the moral foundations of the city. Rumors grow, suspicion spreads, whispers gather like storm clouds. Why does Socrates refuse wealth? Why does he criticize democracy? Why does he ignore the gods of the city? Why do dangerous men admire him? The seeds are planted, planted quietly, planted slowly, planted without Socrates even noticing. Seeds that will one day grow into a death sentence. But that day is not yet here. For now, let us sit with Socrates as he walks with Plato through the agora, as Alcibiades calls out his name from across the street, as Critias watches from a shadowed corner. Let us watch the way he smiles, the way he listens, the way he gently nudges minds toward wisdom. Let us savor this moment, because the world will soon change, and Athens will soon decide that the man who taught it to think must be silenced before it thinks too much. Chapter 9: Athens in Crisis, a democracy wounded and searching for blame. Athens, the brilliant city that once shimmered with confidence, now feels heavy, exhausted, uncertain of itself. Walk through its streets in the years after the Peloponnesian War, and you can feel a strange quiet beneath the noise. Merchants still shout prices, potters still shape wet clay, fishermen still unload shimmering nets of silver-scaled sardines at dawn. But beneath it all is an ache carved into the city like cracks in old marble, an ache the citizens try hard not to look at directly. Athens is no longer the Athens of Socrates' youth. It is now a city asking a haunting question. How does a democracy heal after losing everything? Let us drift into that fragile moment, softly. The wound. For almost 30 years, Athens fought Sparta, a war that was part rivalry, part ideology, part tragic misunderstanding. Athens believed in freedom, debate, openness. Sparta believed in discipline, silence, and order, two mirrors facing each other, each reflecting what the other despised. When the war ended, Athens was left broken, its navy destroyed, its walls torn down, its empire collapsed, its wealth drained, its pride shattered. Athenians had always believed the gods favored them, that they were chosen to illuminate the human mind. But now, they wondered whether the gods had turned away. And in this space of shame, fear, and confusion, a city that once celebrated questioning started to fear questions themselves. A city haunted by shadows. Trauma changes people, it also changes cities. The Athens Socrates now walks through is a city full of ghosts, ghosts of ideas, of memories, of hopes that no longer feel safe. Everywhere he goes, whispers follow. He questions everything. He challenges tradition. His students cause trouble. He makes the young disrespect the old. He doesn't fear the gods. These whispers aren't new, but now they carry a different weight. Before the war, Athenians could laugh at Socrates' strange habits. They could enjoy his debates, admire his eccentricity. He was a harmless curiosity, the city's gentle gadfly. But after the war, the city feels fragile, wounded, and wounds fear anything sharp, even if the blade is truth. Socrates' questions start to feel dangerous, not because they changed, but because Athens changed. What once felt stimulating now feels threatening. What once felt enlightening now feels destabilizing. Athens wants certainty. Socrates offers uncertainty. Athens wants comfort. Socrates offers examination. Athens wants obedience. Socrates offers conscience. And so, fear begins to drip slowly into the city's bloodstream. The 30 tyrants. In the darkest chapter following the war, Sparta installs a harsh oligarchy to rule Athens, the infamous 30 tyrants. One of their leaders is Critias, Socrates' former student, and though Socrates opposes their brutality, though he disobeys their illegal orders, Athens does not remember this later. What they remember is the connection. Critias, brilliant and cold, now condemns and executes citizens. He seizes property, silences dissent, spreads terror, and when Athenians look at him, they whisper, "Wasn't he taught by Socrates?" Fear makes patterns where none exist. Fear connects dots that were never meant to be connected. The sins of the student begin to stain the teacher. Athens doesn't see Socrates and Critias as victims. They see Socrates' shadow behind the tyrant. When the 30 tyrants fall and democracy is restored, Athenians are desperate to cleanse the city of corruption, instability, and threats. They must rebuild their democracy, but to rebuild, they believe something or someone must be sacrificed. The scapegoat instinct. Humans have a deep instinct, older than civilization, older even than written myth. When something goes wrong, someone must be blamed. A city, like a frightened child, looks for a figure to bear its fear. And in this moment of Athens' uncertainty, Socrates is an easy target. He is unusual. He is outspoken. He is relentless in questioning. He ignores wealth and traditions. He stands apart from the crowd. He challenges everyone from generals to priests, and perhaps worst of all, Young men admire him. If a city feels its youth slipping away from tradition, it will look for the person pulling them. Athens sees Socrates at the center of too many stories: Alcibiades, the traitor; Critias, the tyrant; young elites who mocked the city's values; intellectuals who questioned the gods; a generation that no longer accepts because we said so. Even if Socrates never encouraged betrayal, never endorsed violence, never praised tyranny, Athens sees in him the spark of discomfort that became a fire. A city in pain is a city willing to silence the voice that reminds it of its mistakes. A fearful jury. As we walk through the agora with Socrates, we sense a new tension in how people look at him. Some look away, some stare too long, some smile politely, but their eyes show caution. Socrates, wrapped in his old cloak, continues questioning as always, gentle, curious, unafraid. But the city around him tightens, because when democracy is wounded, it can become suspicious. When people are afraid, they can mistake wisdom for threat. When culture feels fragile, it targets those who press too hard on the cracks. And it is not that Athens hates Socrates. It is simply that Athens no longer recognizes the value of what he teaches. In a stable city, he is a philosopher. In a fearful city, he is a danger. To understand why, we must understand what Socrates represents. Not a man, but a mirror. And sometimes, when a society sees its reflection too clearly, it breaks the mirror before it breaks its pride. Looking for answers in all the wrong places, Athens tries to heal after the war, through ceremonies, through reforms, through celebrations of democracy reborn. But none of it quite fills the emptiness. People want answers. Why did the gods abandon us? Whose fault was the loss? Why did our democracy fall? What corrupted our youth? What broke the city we loved? And slowly, painfully, they drift toward a familiar name: Socrates, the man who challenged everything, the man who taught the brilliant troublemakers, the man who made the youth think for themselves, the man who questioned the gods, the man who seemed almost proud not to know the answers they desperately needed. Whether fair or not, Athens begins to feel, if he teaches the youth to question us, won't they abandon us again? If he teaches the powerful to doubt, will they betray us again? If he undermines tradition, won't the city crumble again? Socrates becomes the embodiment of everything Athens fears, and fear, quietly, becomes preparation. Preparation for a trial, preparation for a verdict, preparation for a death that Athens thinks will restore order. Socrates doesn't sense this danger fully, or perhaps he does, and simply accepts it. But we, drifting alongside him in the evening light, can feel the tension tightening like a quiet knot around the city's heart. Athens has begun searching for someone to carry the weight of its wounds, and it is beginning to choose him. Chapter 10. The trial approaches. When a city puts philosophy on trial, even before the formal charges are written, you can almost feel it. A quiet shifting in the air around Athens, a slow, subtle tightening. Socrates, as always, walks barefoot through the agora at dawn, cloak hanging loosely across one shoulder, eyes soft but alert, smiling at fishermen hauling nets and children chasing each other between columns. But the city around him has begun to change in ways he cannot entirely avoid. People still greet him, but some greet him differently, a little quicker, a little more politely, a little more distant. There is something unspoken hanging between Socrates and the city he loves, something like a fading echo, a sense that the harmony between them is beginning to unravel, not because Socrates changed, but because Athens did. And as we drift quietly into this moment, we witness the strange paradox of democracy itself. The same freedom that allows questions can also fear them. Whispers in the agora. It begins with whispers, not loud accusations, not angry speeches, just quiet murmurs. He questions the gods. He teaches the youth strange ideas. He makes the important men look foolish. He associates with traitors. He undermines tradition. Most whispers are not about what Socrates does, but about what he represents. A challenge, a disruption, a reminder that Athens has not fully healed from its wounds. People who once adored listening to him now avoid eye contact. People who once debated enthusiastically now answer with caution. Socrates doesn't chase them. He does not defend himself. He simply continues doing what he has always done, walking, asking, listening, examining, because he believes that examination is love. Love for the soul, love for the city, love for truth. But Athens is no longer sure. It wants that kind of love. Not now, not after everything. The formal accusers, the charges will eventually be brought by three men: Meletus the poet, Anytus the political leader, Lycon the orator, each representing a different faction of Athenian life, art, politics, rhetoric. It is almost symbolic. Three pillars of the city standing against the man who questioned all pillars. But before the charges come, their motivations gather like clouds. Meletus, young and indignant, deeply offended by any hint that the poets are not inspired by the gods. He hears Socrates questioning divine inspiration and feels it like a personal wound. Anytus, wealthy and influential, still furious that Socrates once insulted his career, his education, his class. He fears that Socrates teaches young men to disdain the trades and mistrust democracy. Lycon, the orator, sees Socrates as a threat to the persuasive arts. A man who exposes empty rhetoric is bad for business. None of them alone would have the power to bring a case, but together, they form a triangle of resentment, a quiet convergence of grievances that will soon become legal action. The charges begin to take shape. As the trial draws near, the accusations refine themselves into two deceptively simple charges. 1. Impiety, not believing in the gods of the city, introducing new divine beings. 2. Corrupting the youth, teaching young men to question tradition, undermining respect for authority. Each charge is vague enough to be dangerous, each wide enough to hold any fear Athens wants to place inside. Impiety, what counts as impiety, is asking what gods are, the same as rejecting them. Corrupting the youth, what counts as corruption, teaching them to think, to reason, to challenge, to examine life. The charges sound simple, but they are anything but. They are broad nets, and broad nets catch whatever the fishermen wish. Socrates refuses to escape the storm. Friends sense the danger long before Socrates does. Crito warns him. Apollodorus weeps. Even Plato grows anxious. They beg him to lay low, to stay indoors, to stop questioning people in the marketplace, to soften his conversations, to avoid the aristocratic youth. Socrates smiles, the gentle, calm smile he always carries. If I stop examining life, he says quietly, would I still be myself? His friends fall silent because they know the answer. Socrates has lived 70 years by one principle: a life without examination is not a life worth living. To betray that principle would be a kind of death, a deeper death than anything hemlock could bring. And so, despite the warnings, he continues walking barefoot into the agora each morning, continues engaging strangers with questions, continues challenging assumptions, continues living purely, simply, fearlessly. He is the same Socrates Athens has always known, but Athens is not the same Athens. And this is the tragedy, the city's moral panic. It is not hatred that fuels the charges, not exactly. It is fear, the same fear that haunts societies across all ages, fear of losing the next generation. Older Athenians watch their sons admire Socrates, listen to him, quote him, challenge their parents with his questions, and fear whispers, if they learn to question everything, what will they still believe in? What will they still obey? What will hold the city together? They see Alcibiades, brilliant, reckless, destructive, and blame Socrates. They see Critias, cold, cruel, tyrannical, and blame Socrates. They see their sons choosing philosophy over politics, questioning over conformity, truth over tradition, and blame Socrates. What they cannot see is that Socrates gave these young men something the city did not, a moral compass that points inward, a conscience rather than a command, a search for truth rather than victory. But fear does not distinguish between what a teacher teaches and what a student chooses. Fear makes shadows large. Fear turns nuance into danger. Fear turns questioning into crime. And Athens, still trembling from war and humiliation, is full of fear. The summoning. One morning, as the sun rises over the Acropolis, a young man approaches Socrates. In the agora, he carries a wooden tablet covered in wax, a summons, a legal accusation, a formal command to appear before the city magistrates. The document is simple, but those who hear it recited remember the words forever. Socrates is guilty of not acknowledging the gods of the city and of corrupting the youth. The penalty, death. People in the marketplace stop, breaths hold, eyes widen, and Socrates, he listens calmly, as though someone has told him a question with an obvious answer. No anger, no panic, no trembling, just a soft nod. As the law commands, he says, I will appear. He thanks the young man for delivering the notice, and then, barefoot, he continues walking, surrounded by silence, the moment before the trial. For days afterward, Athens hums with anticipation. Some believe the trial will be quick, some believe he will be fined, some expect exile, some hope for acquittal, some quietly hope for execution. Socrates spends these days not preparing a speech, but talking with friends, not rehearsing arguments, but discussing virtue, not planning how to win, but reflecting on what it means to tell the truth in a frightened city. His friends beg him to craft an emotional defense, to appeal to pity, to flatter the jury, to plead for mercy. But Socrates shakes his head gently. I cannot live dishonestly, he says, so I cannot speak dishonestly. In the courtroom, as everywhere else, I must simply say what is true. Even now, with his life at stake, he will not change the way he has always lived. A soft silence before the storm. Let us pause here. Let the city fade into twilight. Let the tension soften into stillness. This moment, the space between accusation and trial, is one of the most peaceful in Socrates' final year. He walks slowly, surrounded by friends who love him, unbothered by fear, unmoved by anger, breathing deeply in the dusty Athenian air. He knows the storm is approaching. He knows the verdict may be death, but within him is a calm that even the city's unrest cannot disturb, a calm born of a lifetime spent tending the soul. And as the sun dips behind the hills of Attica, Socrates sits beneath an olive tree, watching shadows stretch long across the ground. He does not fear what comes next, because the truth he has always followed, will walk with him into the courtroom, and whatever happens, he will not walk alone. Chapter 11. The Trial of Socrates. When truth stood alone before the crowd. Morning settles softly over Athens, still cool from the night air. The marble steps of the Heliaea, the great courthouse, glow faintly in the early sunlight. Before the heat of the day spreads across Attica, a crowd begins to gather. 501 Athenian jurors, chosen by lot, take their places on wooden benches. Old men with sun-worn faces, farmers who left their fields, potters, sailors, merchants, craftsmen, ordinary citizens, each holding a sliver of the city's authority. Today they will decide the fate of a philosopher who owns nothing, wants nothing, and fears nothing. Socrates walks toward the courthouse, barefoot as always, his cloak draped loosely around his shoulders. Beside him walk his friends, Apollodorus, anxious, Crito, sorrowful, Phaedo, pale with worry, and the young Plato, quiet as a shadow. Yet Socrates seems strangely serene, as if attending a festival rather than his own trial. This calm, the kind that comes only from a lifetime lived in alignment with truth, radiates from him like a faint glow. And Athens notices, entering the court. The courthouse is noisy, more like a marketplace than a solemn chamber. Jurors murmur to each other, spectators whisper, the accusers rehearse their lines one last time. But when Socrates steps forward, a hush falls over the room, not because he is feared, not because he is revered, but because he is unmistakably himself, unbowed, unpolished, unafraid. He stands in the center of 500 men who will judge him, yet he seems as grounded as an olive tree rooted deep in the earth. The herald raises his staff. Let the case of Socrates of Alapes to begin. The accusation. Meletus, the youthful poet, is the first to speak. His voice trembles slightly, but his accusation is clear. Socrates is guilty of corrupting the youth and of not believing in the gods of the city. A murmur ripples through the crowd. Meletus grows bolder. He searches the heavens and the earth, the things beneath and above. He teaches new doctrines. He turns the young against their fathers. He denies the gods. He honors strange spirits. He speaks with conviction, but not with understanding. To him, Socrates represents everything that has gone wrong. With the intellectual ferment of the city, when he finishes, the jurors lean forward. Now, they wait for Socrates' defense. Surely he will beg. Surely he will plead. Surely he will remind them that he has served in battle, that he has lived honestly, that he is an old man. But Socrates begins in the most unexpected way, with gentleness, with clarity, with truth. Socrates speaks. Men of Athens, he says softly, I know well that my accusers are dangerous in their eloquence. I am not an eloquent man. I speak simply in the same words I use in the marketplace. The jurors shift slightly. He continues, I am accused of wisdom, yet I have no wisdom. What I possess is only this, the knowledge that I do not know. This is not the defense. of a man trying to save himself. It is the voice of a man trying to save Athens from misunderstanding itself. He turns to Meletus. "Tell me, Meletus," Socrates asks gently, "who improves the youth?" Meletus, flustered, answers, "All the citizens except you." Socrates tilts his head slightly. "That is curious. One man corrupts them, but all others improve them. Is that truly what you believe?" The courtroom grows still. He continues, "I say that no one intentionally corrupts, for if I corrupted them, I harmed myself, and no man wishes to harm himself." The argument is simple, but its simplicity disarms. The jurors listen. He presses on. The question of the gods. On the charge of impiety, Socrates' voice slows further. "This is sacred ground." My accuser says, "I teach that there are no gods." But he also says, "I teach about spirits and divine signs." He smiles softly. "One cannot believe in flute playing, but deny the existence of flutes." Gentle laughter ripples through the crowd. Socrates continues, "You know I have spoken of the divine voice that turns me from wrongdoing. That is no denial of gods, but the clearest proof that something divine guides me." Meletus stammers. Socrates questions, as always, pull threads from the accusation until the fabric falls apart. But everyone in the room senses something. He is not defending himself to escape punishment. He is clarifying truth because he must. A dangerous honesty. Socrates looks out at the jury, and his expression softens, like a teacher addressing a beloved class. "Men of Athens, you are angry with me because I remind you of your ignorance, but it is the God who commands me to examine the world and the soul." His tone is calm, but his words carry weight. "If you kill me, you will harm yourselves more than you harm me, for I am your gadfly, sent to rouse you from complacency." Some jurors nod, others stiffen, a few frown deeply. Socrates continues, "I will obey the God rather than any man, and while I live, I will not stop examining life." There it is, the line that pierces the courtroom, a vow, a refusal to bend, a gentle defiance. Even his friends hold their breath. These words are beautiful and dangerous. A city wounded by fear hears not devotion, but rebellion. The silent turning of the jury. The jurors must vote. They file up to the urns, one for guilty, one for not guilty. Small bronze ballots dropped softly inside. The sound is like distant rain. The results come quickly. 280 votes for guilt, 221 for innocence. A narrow margin, 30 votes, the width of a single crowded row. Separate life from death. Socrates nods calmly. As the verdict is announced, he seems neither surprised nor disturbed. But now comes the second vote, penalty phase. Socrates refuses to play. The prosecutor recommends death. Socrates is expected to propose a counter penalty, exile or a fine or silence, anything less severe than death. But he stands tall and speaks softly. "What punishment do I deserve for spending my life benefiting the city?" He pauses. "Athens feeds its Olympic victors at public expense. Should I not receive the same? For while they improve your bodies, I improve your souls." Gasps, whispers, shock. His friends plead with him silently. Their eyes beg him, "Please, ask for exile. Ask for anything but death." Socrates sees their grief, but he cannot lie. "I will not beg. I will not weep. I will not say what is false to save my life." Crito tries again. Plato clenches his fists. Baedo swallows tears. But Socrates is at peace. If you were to offer me life on the condition that I cease examining life, he says gently, I would choose death. Another silence. Then the final vote, the sentence, death by hemlock. Socrates' quiet acceptance. No anger, no fear, only gratitude. You have done what you think right. Socrates says softly to the jury, and I shall do what I think right. As the courtroom empties, his friends gather around him, some crying, some stunned. Socrates smiles. Take heart. Nothing bad can happen to a good man. His voice is steady, like a lullaby. Death is either a dreamless sleep or a journey to meet past souls, and either would be a blessing. The jurors leave, believing they have protected the city. Socrates remains, believing he has spoken truth, and perhaps both are true in their own quiet way. Chapter 12. The final hours, the calm before the hemlock. Night settles over Athens with a softness almost unnatural for a city so often full of fire and turmoil. But within the stone walls of the small prison beneath the courthouse, the air is still, quiet, heavy, but not frightening, more like the hush of a thought waiting to be completed. Socrates sits on a narrow wooden cot. His ankles are wrapped in chains, but his posture remains upright, almost regal, as if he were seated at a symposium rather than awaiting death. He is not alone. 15 friends crowd into the dim cell, their faces lined with sleepless sorrow. Phaedo sits closest, his young features tense with grief. Crito paces at the door, restless like a man trying to argue with fate. Apollodorus weeps openly, unable to restrain the emotion that has been building for days. And Plato, absent today, too overwhelmed by heartbreak even to bear witness. The air smells faintly of stone dust and damp straw. An oil lamp flickers on a shelf, its small flame casting soft, trembling shadows that climb the walls like gentle ghosts. Outside, a rooster crowed just a moment ago, a reminder that dawn will come soon, a reminder that Socrates has only hours left to live. Yet his face glows with calm, calm so deep it almost feels like a force in the room, calm so steady that grief itself seems to soften in its presence. The friends who stayed awake all night, the night has been long, they have talked about the soul, about virtue, about courage, about the purpose of life, as though this were any other day. Socrates laughs at times, gentle, warm laughter, as if he were comforting them, not himself. At other moments, he listens with quiet affection to his friends' fears and doubts. He does not soothe them with false hope. He does not deny the reality of what is coming, but he carries no hint of anger, no bitterness, no resentment. He speaks of death as if it was simply another lesson, the final chapter of a long, patient education. His friends marvel at him. How can a man, surrounded by weeping companions, with poison waiting for him, sit so peacefully? But this peace is not new. It is the culmination of a lifetime of examining himself until nothing false remained, a lifetime of listening to conscience until it grew stronger than fear. Crito's last desperate plea. When the first thin streaks of dawn appear, Crito approaches Socrates with urgency. He grips Socrates' hand. My dear friend, he whispers, this must not happen. We have arranged everything. The guard has been bribed. There is a boat waiting. We can escape tonight now. We can bring you to Thessaly. You will be safe. The cell falls silent. Even the lamp flame seems to steady itself. Socrates looks into Crito's pleading eyes with deep tenderness. Crito, he says softly, your devotion is precious to me, but I cannot flee. Crito shakes his head. You must. The The city has wronged you. Why obey unjust laws? Socrates lifts his voice gently, not to silence Crito, but to guide him. All my life, he says, I have lived by the laws of Athens. I have stayed, though I could have left. I have benefited from these laws. If I now break them when they do not favor me, what would that make of my principles? Crito breathes sharply, but Socrates continues. To return injustice with injustice is never right. He pauses, letting the words settle like dust floating slowly through a sunbeam. And if I escape, what will my children learn? That truth must be upheld only when convenient. Crito closes his eyes in pain, but Socrates, ever gentle, touches his arm. Do not grieve. A good man cannot be harmed. In life or in death, the words are soft, almost like a blessing. And yet, something inside Crito breaks, not into despair, but into a deeper, quieter acceptance. The jailer enters. The heavy door grinds open. A guard enters, a man who, over the past month, has grown fond of Socrates. He carries a small clay cup. The liquid inside is dull green. Hemlock. His eyes are red. Socrates, he says hoarsely, you are the noblest man ever to pass through this place. I am sorry for what I must do. His voice cracks. He sets the cup down, turns away quickly, and wipes his face with his sleeve. As he steps out, the door closes behind him. Socrates gazes at the cup calmly. He does not flinch. He does not hesitate. Instead, he asks softly, may I offer a small portion to the gods? The guard's earlier words echo in the minds of the friends. There is only enough for the dose. Socrates nods, accepting that even the ritual offering must be done without wine. Then I will pray instead, he says, that this journey from life to death may be blessed. He lifts the cup. His hand is steady, not because he is brave, though he is, not because he is fearless, though he seems so, but because for him, death is not a threat. It is simply the next step in the great conversation. The drinking of the hemlock. Socrates drinks the poison in one long, calm swallow. His friends turn away, unable to watch. Apollodorus sobs so loudly that Socrates pauses to chide him gently. Hush, my friend, let us meet death with quiet dignity. He stands, as instructed, and begins walking slowly around the cell. The poison works upward. From the feet, he describes each sensation with calm curiosity. My feet grow heavy, numb, as if they are falling asleep. After a few minutes, his legs weaken. He lies down on the cot, arranging his cloak neatly. Phaedo wipes his eyes. Crito holds his hand. Others stand silently, forming a small circle around the bed. One friend touches his foot. Socrates, he whispers, do you still feel this? Socrates shakes his head. No, the poison has reached his knees, then his thighs. It creeps upward, like a cold tide. Socrates remains serene, and then, just before the final numbness reaches his chest, he uncovers his face and speaks his last words. Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Do not forget, a simple offering, a thank you to the God of healing. To him, death is not destruction, it is cure, release, freedom from the body that has distracted the soul. Crito nods, tears streaming down his face. We will remember. Socrates' breathing slows, and then, like a lamp whose oil has quietly run dry, he is gone. The gentle stillness after. No one speaks at first. The cell is silent in a way that feels sacred. The light flickers, and rests on Socrates' peaceful expression. He looks not like a man who died, but like a man who finally found the answer he had spent his life seeking. His friends begin to weep, some softly, some uncontrollably, but beneath their grief is something deeper, a stillness, a clarity, a strange, paradoxical comfort. For Socrates has shown them what it means to meet death without fear, without anger, without regret. He has shown them what a life looks like when lived with integrity from beginning to end. He has shown them that truth does not die. When a body dies, it simply finds new voices, voices that will soon leave this cell and carry his legacy into the world.